Okay. We began yesterday the portion of Yisro, the Yishma Yisro Choin Nidron. So Rashi had cited the Gemara. We'd mentioned there are two opinions. What exactly was so overwhelmingly attractive and drawing to Yisro that it was enough for him to abandon all his glory in Midjan and go out to the desert and become part of the Jewish people. So one opinion is he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. And the other opinion is he heard about Milchemes Amalek, the war against the Amalekites. So there's a beautiful word from the Ksaf Sofer who asks, we understand the war against the Amalekites. We understand why, the Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, with the 250 miracles which were witnessed, and it's something which never ever happened in the history of the world. And as the Gemara tells us, that when the water flowed, instead of flowing horizontally, it flowed vertically, and people in Canaan, throughout Canaan, were able to see the walls of water just flowing in an upward direction. And as it says in the Midrash, that when the sea split, every body of water in the world split. The ships that were in the Yam Suf in the sea were destroyed, regardless of the size of those ships. It was something which everybody was touched by. We understand that's something to be impacted by. To understand that if this is the God of the Jews, I want to be part of that program. But the war against the Amalekites, which was only as a result of a lack of faith, because they had said, when there was no longer water, they said, is God in our midst or not? So Hashem says, after all I've done for you, is that a question for you to ask? Is God in our midst or not? I will send you a nation, Asher lo yorei Elokim. This nation does not fear God. So you're on the same page, and you will be attacked by them. And that's the story with the Amalekites. And he sent Yoshua to lead the Jews in battle. And Moshe prayed, as the Torah describes. Aaron was to one side of him. Hur was on the other side. His nephew was on the other side of him, the son of Miriam. And as he raised his hands, the Jews were victorious. And as he lowered his hands, the Jews began losing. And finally, they won the battle. That's the story. What's so impressive? There's no mad band attacked us. We defeated them. Why is that so overwhelmingly impressive that it's enough for you to abandon all your glory to go into a desert to become part of the Jewish people? So he says a beautiful word, the Ksaf Sofer. Initially, Yisro was a pagan. It was an idolater. How did Yisro himself come upon God? So the Midrash tells us that he worshipped every deity in existence, and he did his analysis in this area. And at the end of the day, the conclusion was that idolatry is false, and there's only one monotheistic being that wills this existence. He came to this conclusion through his own research, through his own initiative. So he felt at that point, you only need an environment if there's certain gray areas, and therefore you're vulnerable to certain levels of what? Of negative influence. So you have to be part of a group to secure the appropriate belief. But he personally was through the thick and thin of research on all the deities, idolatry, and his final conclusion was through his own initiative that it's all false. There's no reason for him to become part of the Jewish people. But what happened? The Jews, they experienced the splitting of the sea. The Jews, when they saw, they witnessed the 10 plagues in Egypt. And as we said, that Yisro was one of the three advisors of Paro, and he understood what that was all about. what it meant, who Paro was, what the Egyptian civilization was, and how they were decimated. After the sea, they went 3 days, there was no water. Moshe provided water for them by throwing that tree into the bitter oasis. Then they were given manna. And after all is said and done, there's a lack of water for a moment. They begin complaining, is God in our midst or not? How's it possible? After seeing the hand of God so clearly, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, the endless miracles, the water, bitter water turning sweet, and the manna. And after all that, you say, is God in our midst or not? So we see from here, his takeaway was that regardless of the level of clarity you may come to, a person is always susceptible, due to we're all human beings, to the machinations of the evil inclination. And he's always able to whisper in our ears something which will create a doubt, a question, and you could revert back to where you came from. Therefore, he understood from the experience of the Jews and their behavior that as secure as you are, you're never secure. And therefore, you need that support system. You need the environment to secure your belief, the proper belief. Therefore, Yisro, after hearing about the war of the Amalekites, it was impressive. It was an eye-opener for him that without that environment, without shoring up your belief, you're never sure, you never guarantee that you're going to remain there. There's always a possibility that you could always regress and revert back to where you came from. This is the Ksav Sofer. It's interesting, the Rambam in the first chapter in the Laws of Avodah Zarah writes, there's a negative commandment, Lo sifnu elo halilim. You should not turn towards idolatry. Doesn't mean necessarily just be an idolater. Don't even consider it. So Rambam writes that the human mind, the human capacity has limitation. And what you believe one day to be absolute truth, tomorrow may come into question, and you may question it. And we vacillate. Based on what we see, what we experience, we're definite at one moment and the next moment, because some intervening, external, internal, whatever it may be, automatically causes the lens changes, and we see it differently. And the words of Rambam are Daiton Shalodom Ktsara. The mind of a human being is limited. And because of the limitation, we don't always see everything in absolute clarity. Therefore, there's always this vacillation. So Lil Sifto Alila means, the Rambam says that if a Jew, his belief is rooted, because he says, I came upon it. And that's why I believe monotheism is correct. He says, you're in violation of the Sifto Alila. Why? Because a Jew, his basis for his belief has to be Sinai. Sinai was irrefutable fact. As the Rambam writes, a prophet who prophesizes, prophecy is directly to the soul. It's not through the human faculty. God communicates with the neshama of the person. There's no level of clarity and absoluteness and definiteness that a person could experience in this existence, which is comparable to prophecy. Every Jew at Sinai had openly saw God face to face. We prophesied in the wake state because it was crucial and essential that, as the Rambam says, B'chol yaminu l'olam. After Sinai, the Jews will believe in you forever. It will never come into question the veracity and the authenticity and the truth of who you are, that you are my spokesman. The miracles are not sufficient. Although we're convinced now, tomorrow we may say Moshe was a greater sorcerer than all the Egyptians. That may happen tomorrow. But when you see God face to face at that level of prophecy, this can never be undone. It never could ever come into question. You could delude yourself, but it can never come into question. Therefore, the Jew, if it's his belief in God is only based on his own analysis, he's a violation of that because he's not secure. The only way a Jew could be secure is if it's factual, irrefutable fact, which is Sinai. These are the words of Rambam. So Yisro, a semblance of that, he came upon truth because he actually worshipped every idol, every deity, and he came to the conclusion that it's false. It's not the truth. Therefore, all this only adds up if there's a monotheistic being. But when he saw what happened to the Jews, after all they saw, this is pre-Sinai, you're never secure. You have to have that direct exposure to God's presence and be part of the Jewish people. Therefore, Mashmu Shama Uba, what did he hear, which was so impactful on him and literally ruffled his feathers, that even after Kriyas Yamsuf, you're able to experience and deserve to be attacked by the Amalekites. That's the Ksav Sofer. I remember I mentioned the word in the past of Ramey Simcha Dvinsk. He poses a question. It's right at the beginning of Shmos in his commentary. Moshe Rabbeinu, what is the basis for Torah, for the authenticity of Torah? It's Moshe Tziva, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, right? Moshe is the connection. Moshe was the one who we had witnessed God speaking to Moshe. Moshe, go tell him such and such. So he poses a question. Did Moshe have choice in the area that he could deny the authenticity of Torah? Could he ever said such a thing? That's the question Ramey Simcha Dvinsk asks. Or God withdrew his choice in that particular area, because if he would have chosen to say that, it's the end of Judaism. Because what is the basis of the truth of Torah? It's the word of Moshe Rabbeinu. So if Moshe is the source, and he himself should say, I pulled the wool over your eyes, the objective of the world comes to an end. Therefore, Ramey Simcha says, Moshe Rabbeinu had no choice in this area. God had to withdraw his choice. So the question is, so if you have no choice, but if life is choice, so how does he withdraw his choice, regardless of the ramification, the consequences of that? So he explains, similar to what the Rambam says regarding Paro. It says, V'yezek Hashem is like Paro. After the first 5 plagues, Hashem withdrew the choice, the ability to make a choice. Why? That because since the first five plagues, God's presence was so obvious, almost undeniable, and Paro turned his back on God. God says, the punishment is I withdraw your ability to make choice from now going forward. You no longer have that choice. So why did he forfeit his ability to make a choice? Because he chose to be so defiant against God. It was his choice to forfeit the choice. It's only because he reached that level of rejecting God, defiance, that's why God withdraws choice. So at the end of the day, why did he not have choice? Because he chose not to have choice due to his misbehavior. I always give the example. You have a child who has a privilege, and the parent says to the child that you've abused the privilege long enough, I give you one more chance. If you abuse it one more time, I withdraw the privilege. So afterwards, the child doesn't have the privilege. So the child accuses the father that he's denying the child. And the father's a bad person. So the father says to the child, no, I gave you a choice. And I gave you one last chance, and you chose to cross the line. It was due to your choice to cross that line, you forfeit your privileges. So again, why doesn't he have privileges? Because you chose to misbehave. Paro had the ability to continue to have free choice. He crossed the line too many times. Therefore, he deserved to forfeit the ability to make a choice. Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was so special that he was worthy and qualified to be the conduit to receive the Torah on behalf of the Jewish people, therefore, he was chosen. But once you go into that, you're chosen for that, automatically, you have no choice to reject it any longer. But you have no choice. So that you remain steadfast that the Torah is the word of Hashem and you can't make a choice differently, but that means you have no choice. No, he's only at that level because he was worthy. He made choices to achieve a level of worthiness that he should be the conduit for Torah. So the reason why he had no choices here, only because he's such a tzaddik, and so humble, therefore was due to his choice, he had no choice. It's the other side of the coin, what the Rambam says in regard to Paro. It's an obvious question. There were many brilliant people in the world, and they all heard what Yisro heard, the splitting of the sea, about the 10 plagues, the height of civilization, which was Egypt, the Egyptian armies, which were the most powerful armies in the world, in a moment were destroyed by the sea coming down on them. I mean, why was Yisro the only one who was touched and moved by this? Hearing things which never ever happened in the history of existence. How was nobody somehow touched in a way, at least to be curious? Pick yourself up and go see what it's all about. Yisro was the only one. Why Yisro? Why no one else? I think it's an obvious question.
But he spent however many years he spent with Moshe.
That's the answer. That's the answer. You know, we say, Tov l'tzadik, tov l'shcheno. It's good for the tzaddik and it's good for his neighbor. We'll see later, in terms of when Korach, his family, you know, the infrastructure of the Jewish people, the way they traveled, the outer camp was the camp of Yisrael. The next camp going towards the center was the camp of Levi, Machda Levi. The center camp was Machda Shechina. That's where the Mishkan was. The tribe of Reuven, Korach, his family, who are the neighbors? You know who the neighbors were? Neighbor was Dustin and Aviram. Dustin and Aviram was the neighbor of Korach. The Moshe and Aaron, his neighbors, because they were their neighbors, that we say Tov l'tzadik, Tov l'shcheno. It's good for the tzaddik. It's good for the neighbor. There is a certain, even if there's no necessarily verbal communication, just being exposed to the person's presence, you become a beneficiary. Being exposed to an evil person. Does not Biram, which were the bone of contention continuously throughout all the years, they were Korach's neighbors. You know, we say in Pirkei Avos, Harchek mishochin ro, tischaber l'rosha. Keep your distance from a bad neighbor, but don't attach yourself to an evil person. So the question is asked, what do we say only Harchek mishochin ro? Why only the bad neighbor? You should say Harchek mi rosha. Keep your distance from a Russia. A Russia, don't attach yourself to him, but you don't have to keep your distance. But a bad neighbor, you have to keep your distance. You got to be wary. That's the questions asked by the Meforshim, by the commentators. The answer is, a person's a bad neighbor. It's not clear in the person's mind why he's evil, but he doesn't meet the grade because it's not a black and white categorization that he's evil. So you don't see him necessarily in terms of what he really is, what he represents. As a result of that, the certain precautions you would normally take, you're not going to take those precautions. Or the alertness you will have, you're not going to have that level of alertness, awareness. Therefore, you'll be subject at a subliminal level to that person's comments, to his behavior. Therefore, when it comes to a bad neighbor, harchek, you got to keep your distance. Because you never know when you're going to be influenced. A person's in Russia, which it's clear, you want nothing to do with this person. Even if you're within his proximity, you're not going to be influenced by him. Therefore, it's al tischaber. Just don't get too intimate with him. Don't get too close to him. But you don't have to keep, like you go behind the fire truck and says, keep 200 yards behind the fire truck. That's the way you have to stay away from a bad neighbor, because you never know when the neighbor will somehow, at a subliminal level, influence you. That's what it's about. Does not Viram, they were the ultimate pedigree of the Jewish people. They were the children of the Bechor, Reuven, and they flexed their muscle. They knew exactly how to present themselves in a public venue that people were impressed. And Korach was influenced by this. That's Oil Russia Woe to the Russia, woe to the neighbor.
What does it mean?
Yisro spent 40, 50 years with Moshe. You know what it means? Moshe Rabbeinu, the most special human being who ever walked the face of the earth. Moshe Rabbeinu was already a prophet before he went to Midian. How did Yisro know who Moshe was initially? When his daughters came back and told him that the water had risen towards him, when he drew the water to water the flocks of his daughters, they were the shepherds. When he heard the water rose towards Moshe Rabbeinu, he knew Moshe Rabbeinu was a special person. He knew he was one of a kind of person. His pedigree was the Jewish people. He knew this. As a result of that, and that was the beginning. And he wanted that this person should be his son-in-law. And there was an interaction over years between them. So after having that level of exposure and orientation through that relationship, when you hear this, you have that very keen ear, sensitive understanding of what the value of this is. The world, they had their heads in the sand, in the feed bag. They were immersed in whatever their lives were all about. Yisro was, as they say, he was ready to go. He just needed that alert. Once the alert was, when he heard Mechemes Amalek, he's ready, he's out the door. He's not staying there any longer. Of course, he understands the vulnerability of a human being. Therefore, he abandoned all his glory to go out to the desert to become part of the Jewish people for that reason.